Hi, I'm Frances Dickey, curator of T.S. Eliot, A Game of Chess, an exhibit at the World Chess Hall of Fame in St. Louis. This exhibit features T.S. Eliot's poem, The Wasteland, considered one of the greatest poems of the 20th century. T.S. Eliot grew up in St. Louis, where he played chess with his father. And this exhibit follows Eliot through his relationship with his father, his interest in the game of chess, which he wove into the poem, and the text of the poem itself, which you can experience through images, explanations, interactives, and artifacts such as texts that Eliot used in the composition of the poem, artifacts from his childhood in St. Louis, including bricks from the hydraulic press brick company, of which his father was president. T.S. Eliot grew up in St. Louis, where his family had deep roots, but at the age of 16 he left, and he never came back, eventually settling in London in 1914. So he felt that his father was disappointed in him for not coming back to the United States, and also for, as he said, making a mess of his life. He had married a woman who he wasn't really compatible with, Vivian Haywood, and his father did not approve of the marriage. And so this created even more difficulty for Eliot in getting over his grief for his father's death. One of my favorite artifacts in this show is this photograph of Henry Ware Eliot Sr., the poet's father, playing chess. We found this photograph in the archive of the Hydraulic Press Brick Company. Henry Ware Eliot was the president of this large St. Louis company that provided bricks for buildings, streets, tunnels, and even the Eads Bridge in the city. He also had a great love of chess, as you can see in this photograph that shows the chessboard faintly in the background. And he passed this love on to his youngest son. We also have images of his chess notebook and his pieces, which Eliot's mother sent to Eliot after his father's death in 1919. Henry Ware Eliot Sr.'s death was probably one of the precipitating events that led to the writing of The Wasteland, Eliot's greatest poem. This poem is an elegy. An elegy is a work of art that mourns for and leads us to consolation for someone's death. The Wasteland has 5 parts, and the first part is called The Burial of the Dead. And he doesn't say explicitly that he's grieving for his father, but there are references to fathers throughout the poem. So the poem begins in April because that's the time of renewal for the earth, but the poet is not ready for this step. He still feels the need to dwell in his grief.
April is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of the dead land, mixing memory and desire, stirring dull roots with spring rain. Winter kept us warm, covering earth in forgetful snow, feeding a little life with dried tubers.
The poem is also an elegy for the millions of soldiers who had recently died in World War I, and this is the context in which the poem is often understood. World War I had wiped out an entire generation of young men in Europe, and people feared their populations would never recover, that their culture was inexorably changed by this war. So the poem also mourns for these young men, and there are many scenes of desert wastelands throughout the poem. These wastelands are both a reflection of the physical devastation of the war and its spiritual impact on the people of Europe.
What are the roots that clutch? What branches grow out of this stony rubbish? Son of man, you cannot say or guess, for you know only a heap of broken images. Where the sun beats, and the dead tree gives no shelter, the cricket no relief, and the dry stone no sound of water.
Desert landscapes like this alternate in the poem with water, flowers, and birdsong, the images of renewal. These images are classic elements of the poetic elegy. But the poem also includes another element, which is the quest. This case in T.S. Eliot, A Game of Chess, shows some of the artifacts relating to the quest theme of the poem. When Eliot was a child, he loved reading the Arthurian legends, as many children do. And in this case, we have some of the editions that he used, children's versions of these medieval romances. And his mind was particularly captivated by the story of Sir Galahad, who attempts to recover the Holy Grail. We also have an ancient Syrian cup that represents the Holy Grail, that is the goal of the searching in the wasteland. However, in this poem, we're not really sure that anyone ever achieves their goal. One of the passages later in the poem describes the Chapel Perilous, which is one of the challenges that Galahad has to pass through on his way to retrieving the Grail. The quest narrative allows Eliot to weave in a number of different elements into the poem, such as his spiritual searching for answers to profound questions. He would eventually find refuge in the Church of England, but at this time he was open to many different kinds of religion, and the poem quotes from Christian, Buddhist, and Hindu scripture. The poem also engages with the story of the quest for the Holy Grail through references to the tarot cards. One of the characters in the poem, perhaps the poet himself, goes to get his fortune told, and among the cards that the fortune teller, Madame Sosostris, turns up for him are the Phoenician sailor and the hanged man. Not all of these are actual tarot cards, but we have some tarot cards in our case, so you can see what some of these images look like. So in the poem, the poet goes to get his fortune told.
Madame Sosostris, famous clairvoyante, had a bad cold. Nevertheless, is known to be the wisest woman in Europe, with a wicked pack of cards.
"Here,"
said she,
"is your card, the drowned Phoenician sailor."
those are pearls that were his eyes. Look.
"Here is Belladonna, the Lady of the Rocks, the Lady of Situations."
The title of this show, T.S. Eliot, A Game of Chess, refers to the second part of the poem, which is called A Game of Chess. This is the most intense and personal part of the poem, and it describes a woman sitting at her dressing table in a very elaborate room decorated with many things. We created a scene that you can see behind me that refers to many of the objects that also appear in the poem. Many people think that the figure of the woman sitting in a chair, combing her hair, is a description of Eliot's wife, Vivian Heywood. At this time, the two of them were not on very good terms. Vivian suffered from substance abuse issues, and Eliot was working hard to make everything seem normal to the outside world. There are many literary references in this passage, but you can also hear behind it a kind of anguish that the poet feels about his wife and the situation that they find themselves in. You'll notice that at the end of this passage, the married couple is playing a game of chess to pass the time because they have little to talk about.
The chair she sat in, like a burnished throne, glowed on the marble where the glass, held up by standards wrought with fruited vines, from which a golden Cupidon peeped out. Another hid his eyes behind his wing, doubled the flames of 7-branched candelabra, reflecting light upon the table as the glitter of her jewels rose to meet it, from satin cases poured in rich profusion. In vials of ivory and colored glass, unstoppered, lurked her strange synthetic perfumes, unguent, powdered, or liquid, troubled, confused, and drowned the sense in odors, stirred by the air that freshened from the window. These ascended in fattening the prolonged candle flames, flung their smoke into the laquiaria, stirring the pattern on the coffered ceiling. Huge sea wood fed with copper, burned green and orange, framed by the colored stone, in which sad light a carved dolphin swam. Above the antique mantel was displayed, as though a window gave upon the sylvan scene, the change of Philomel by the barbarous king, so rudely forced. Yet there the nightingale filled all the desert with inviolable voice, and still she cried, and still the world pursues, jug, jug, to dirty ears.
And other withered stumps of time were told upon the walls. Staring forms leaned out, leaning, hushing the room enclosed. Footsteps shuffled on the stair. Under the firelight, under the brush, her hair spread out in fiery points, glowed into words, then would be savagely still.
Then the couple has a conversation, but they can't seem to understand one another.
What shall I do now? What shall I do? I shall rush out as I am and walk the street with my hair down so. What shall we do tomorrow? What shall we ever do?
The hot water at 10, and if it rains, a closed car at 4, and we shall play a game of chess, pressing lidless eyes and waiting for a knock upon the door.
The wasteland describes a big city full of music by the banks of a great river. This is London, but it's also St. Louis, where Eliot grew up, in the midst of an amazing cultural moment with music coming to him from every side, from the banks of the Mississippi all the way out to Grand Avenue. So we created a map based on a historic map of St. Louis in 1900 that shows some of the musical venues that Eliot would have attended during his time as a child. He grew up at 2635 Locust Street, which was right in the middle of a very interesting part of St. Louis, where you had a lot of ragtime being played along Jefferson Avenue, but you also had the Beethoven Conservatory, which was half a block from his house, where he probably took piano lessons with his sisters. And on the other side of his house, the Church of the Messiah, where the St. Louis Choral Symphony, as it was then called, performed because they were waiting for their new venue to be built on Grand Avenue. So Eliot was surrounded by music. And one of the amazing things about his childhood is that he grew up half a block from Scott Joplin's house. The two of them probably never met, but Eliot definitely heard a lot of ragtime as he was growing up. And the ragtime makes its way into Eliot's poem. He refers to the Shakespearean rag. His poem is kind of a Shakespearean rag because he's ragging on Shakespeare during the conversation between the husband and wife in a game of chess. So he says,
But oh, 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 that Shakespearean rag, it's so elegant, so intelligent.
And those are words from an actual song from the 1920s. So you can see on this map where Scott Joplin's house was. You can also see where the Olympic Theater was, down by the river, which was a huge theater seated over 2,000 people. And they had all kinds of performances there, including the works of Wagner. And Richard Wagner's operas became one of Eliot's touchstones in this poem. And he makes reference to quotes from many of Wagner's operas, including Tristan and Isolde, which is a story of star-crossed lovers, and also Das Rheingold, another opera by Wagner, which features Rhine maidens kind of disporting themselves in the Rhine. And Eliot is thinking about all the great rivers that he's lived by, including the Mississippi, and now the Thames in London. So in the poem, he writes,
This music crept by me upon the waters, and along the Strand up Queen Victoria Street. O city, city, I can sometimes hear beside a public bar in Lower Thames Street the pleasant whining of a mandolin, and a clatter and a chatter from within, where fishmen lounge at noon, where the walls of Magnus Martyr hold inexplicable splendor of Ionian white and gold.
The river sweats, oil and tar. The barges drift with the turning tide. Red sails wide to lower swing on the heavy spar. The barges wash drifting logs down Greenwich Reach, past the Isle of Dogs.
The Wasteland is an elegy, a quest for spiritual enlightenment, and a song that weaves together the sounds that Eliot found most meaningful, from birdsong to opera to ragtime. T.S. Eliot, A Game of Chess, is on view through March 24, 2024. For more information, see us online at worldchesshof.org.